The night had quieted, but the light never died. Long after the plates were cleared and the candle had burned low, I stood by the window, watching her move through the room. She folded the napkins, wiped the glasses, and when she thought I wasn't looking, she placed one fork beside the third plate again, careful, almost reverent, as if she was afraid to wake something sleeping there. Outside snow gathered on the porch railing like dust on a memory. The air was cold enough to sting, yet I couldn't step away. The glass between us reflected two people who had once shared everything and now stood on opposite sides of silence. "You still set a place," I'd said once. Old habits, came the answer. Whose habit? No reply. Just the sound of a chair being pushed in gentle, deliberate, the way you end a prayer. I stepped outside for air, but the night clung to me like guilt. The snow fell slow, wide flakes spiraling down, as if time itself had loosened. From the porch, I could still see her, a shape behind the window, framed by candlelight. My reflection hovered over hers, two ghosts divided by glass, both pretending to be alive. For a second, I raised my hand, almost knocking, but the thought of breaking that fragile peace felt wrong. It wasn't the kind of silence you disturbed. It was the kind you earned. The wind carried faint laughter from the street children, building something out of snow, maybe believing it would last till morning. I remembered how she used to love that sound, how she'd press her ear to the window and whisper, "That's what hope sounds like." I wondered when she stopped saying that, or if she still whispered it when I wasn't listening. Now hope sounded different. It creaked through the floorboards, breathed through the candlelight, lived in the way. She couldn't stop setting that extra chair. Every movement was a ritual, every pause a confession. She wasn't waiting for someone to come home. She was keeping someone from leaving completely. A memory surfaced, gentle and uninvited. Years ago, another Christmas, the laughter of family. Still fresh, the tree, still alive. She'd poured wine into 3 glasses back then, too, though our son had already gone upstairs. "You keep setting the table for 3. I'd said, half teasing. "We'll always save a seat." She smiled. "Just in case." "Case of what?" "Love finds its way back." I hadn't understood then. I thought she meant for the boy. Maybe she did. Or maybe she was already setting a place for the man she knew I would one day stop being. For a moment I thought of stepping back into the room, saying something simple. "It's enough now. You don't have to keep a place for him." But the truth was, I didn't even know who him was anymore. The man she used to love, the one she used to forgive, or the shadow sitting in that chair, refusing to disappear. The snow outside thickened, blurring the world into shades of white and gold. Inside, She hummed softly, a tune I didn't recognize, maybe one she'd made to fill the quiet. Her hand lingered on the back of the chair. For a second, I thought she would finally pull it away. But instead she straightened it, smoothed the tablecloth. "It's for peace," she'd whispered once, voice trembling like the flame itself. "For who?" "For the man who stopped believing." And just like that, I felt the room tilt, not from sadness, but from understanding. The man she spoke of wasn't gone. He was still here, watching through glass, too afraid to knock, too proud to be forgiven. The clock struck midnight. Bells echoed somewhere far away. The light from the candle reached the window, catching on the frost, splitting into shards of gold that danced across her face. For the first time in a long time, she looked younger, not in years, but in peace. She turned toward the window, maybe sensing me, maybe not. Her eyes passed over the reflection, but didn't stop. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile you give to something you've already made peace with. Then she blew out the candle. The room went dark, but the glow stayed inside me, quiet, heavy, and warm. I realized she wasn't setting a place for me at all. She was setting it for the man she still believed I could be. The night had quieted, but the light never died. Long after the plates were cleared and the candle had burned low, I stood by the window watching her move through the room. She folded the napkins, wiped the glasses, and when she thought I wasn't looking, she placed one fork beside the third plate again, careful, almost reverent, as if she was afraid to wake something sleeping there. Outside, snow gathered on the porch railing like dust on a memory. The air was cold enough to sting, yet I couldn't step away. The glass between us reflected two people who had once shared everything and now stood on opposite sides of silence. "You still set a place," I'd said once. "Old habits," came the answer. "Whose habit?" No reply. Just the sound of a chair being pushed in gentle, deliberate, the way you end a prayer. I stepped outside for air, but the night clung to me like guilt. The snow fell slow, wide flakes spiraling down, as if time itself had loosened. From the porch I could still see her, a shape behind the window, framed by candlelight. My reflection hovered over hers, two ghosts divided by glass, both pretending to be alive. For a second, I raised my hand, almost knocking, but the thought of breaking that fragile peace felt wrong. It wasn't the kind of silence you disturbed. It was the kind you earned. The wind carried faint laughter from the street children, building something out of snow, maybe believing it would last till morning. I remembered how she used to love that sound, how she'd press her ear to the window and whisper, "That's what hope sounds like." I wondered when she stopped saying that, or if she still whispered it when I wasn't listening. Now hope sounded different. It creaked through the floorboards, breathed through the candlelight, lived in the way. She couldn't stop setting that extra chair. Every movement was a ritual, every pause a confession. She wasn't waiting for someone to come home. She was keeping someone from leaving completely. A memory surfaced, gentle and uninvited. Years ago, another Christmas, the laughter of family, still fresh, the tree, still alive. She'd poured wine into 3 glasses back then, too, though our son had already gone upstairs. "You keep setting the table for 3, I'd said, half teasing. "We'll always save a seat," she smiled, "just in case." In case of what? In case love finds its way back. Love finds. I hadn't understood then. I thought she meant for the boy. Maybe she did. Or maybe she was already setting a place for the man she knew I would one day stop being. For a moment, I thought of stepping back into the room, saying something simple. "It's enough now. You don't have to keep a place for him." But the truth was, I didn't even know who him was anymore. The man she used to love, the one she used to forgive, or the shadow sitting in that chair, refusing to disappear. The snow outside thickened, blurring the world into shades of white and gold. Inside, she hummed softly, a tune I didn't recognize, maybe one she'd made to fill the quiet. Her hand lingered on the back of the chair. For a second, I thought she would finally pull it away, but instead she straightened it, smoothed the tablecloth. "It's for peace," she'd whispered once, voice trembling like the flame itself. For who? For the man who stopped believing. And just like that, I felt the room tilt, not from sadness, but from understanding. The man she spoke of wasn't gone. He was still here, watching through glass, too afraid to knock, too proud to be forgiven. The clock struck midnight. Bells echoed somewhere far away. The light from the candle reached the window, catching on the frost, splitting into shards of gold that danced across her face. For the first time in a long time, she looked younger, not in years, but in peace. She turned toward the window, maybe sensing me, maybe not. Her eyes passed over the reflection, but didn't stop. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile you give to something you've already made peace with. Then she blew out the candle. The room went dark, but the glow stayed inside me, quiet, heavy, and warm. I realized she wasn't setting a place for me at all. She was setting it for the man she still believed I could be. Morning came slow, the kind of gray light that doesn't warm anything, only reveals what the night tried to hide. The candle had burned down to its base. The chair was still there untouched, standing like a witness that refused to move on. I poured coffee for 2 out of habit, then set 1 cup down across from me. It sat there, steaming in the cold air, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. I told myself I'd clear the table that morning, but instead I started with the drawer beside it, the one filled with things we used to keep for later. Old receipts, birthday cards, a note that still smelled faintly of pine. I found the small box near the back, tied with ribbon, that had turned pale from years of waiting. Inside were letters, folded, faded, soft, from being read too many times. One envelope wasn't sealed. The handwriting was hers, steady, deliberate, with that small curve at the end of every word she meant. To the man I used to love, not the man I lost. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the words until they stopped being letters and became something heavier, a truth that had been waiting for its turn to speak. When I finally unfolded the paper, it crackled like frost, breaking underfoot. "You don't need to come back," it said. "You just need to remember who you were when you believed love was something you kept, not something you survived." The words didn't accuse. They forgave quietly, completely, like winter forgiving the trees for losing their leaves. I felt something shift inside me, something that had been frozen for years. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is, not being told you were wrong, but being seen as someone who could still be right again. I set the letter down, but my hands wouldn't let go. Her voice echoed through it, calm and distant. "You always needed the world to stop hurting before you could speak. And I loved you anyway." The room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of quiet, not the heavy one from last night. This one felt gentle, like the moment before snow touches the ground. I looked at the chair. The cup of coffee had gone cold, but the steam still lingered in my mind, rising, curling, fading like breath leaving a memory. I thought about how many years she had spent forgiving versions of me I no longer remembered being. The man who promised too much. The man who left too soon. The man who stayed too long to matter. It struck me how easily people forgive what time erases, and how hard it is to forgive what it leaves behind. I stood up, picked up the cup she never drank from, and poured it out in the sink. The sound was soft, final. Then I opened the window. Cold air rushed in, touching my face like absolution. "You kept your promise," I whispered. "Which one?" "The one where you said you'd forgive me even if I never asked." Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The street glowed pale under the morning sun, as if the world had been rinsed clean and left to dry in silence. I folded the letter and placed it back in the box. For the first time, I didn't close the drawer. I let it stay open, like a wound finally learning how to breathe. And as the light stretched across the floor, I realized something simple and cruel. She hadn't forgiven me because I deserved it. She'd forgiven me because that's who she was. And maybe that's why I could never forget her, because she never needed me to be better, only to remember who I once was before the silence. The road to the cemetery was quiet snow piled high on both sides, muffling the sound of the world. The sky hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that felt endless. I hadn't been there in months, maybe years. I told myself it was because I wanted to remember him alive. But deep down, I knew it was because peace had made me lazy, comfortable in forgetting. When I reached the gate, I almost turned back. The hinges groaned as I pushed it open, the sound sharp against the stillness. Everything looked smaller, buried under winter. Even the headstones seemed to bow under the weight of the snow. His name was still clear on the marble carved deep enough that even time had been careful around it. I brushed the snow away with my glove, tracing the letters I'd once promised to visit every Christmas. "You said you'd come," a voice whispered inside me, not hers, not his, maybe mine. "I came late. You always do." I knelt not out of prayer, but out of memory. The candle I'd brought refused to stay lit, the wind stealing the flame every time it tried to stand. After a few tries, I stopped trying. Maybe not everything needed to burn to be remembered. I sat there for a while, watching the sky shift from silver to pale blue. The silence felt familiar, like an old song that once meant comfort, but now only played to remind you what you've lost. I thought of the word peace again. She'd used it last night like it still meant something holy. But here, among the frozen flowers and unfinished goodbyes, peace felt different. It felt like surrender, wearing forgiveness's clothes. I remembered the day she told me to stop visiting. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself," she'd said. "It's not punishment," I'd answered. "Then what is it?" "It's peace." "No," she'd whispered, turning away. "It's hiding." She'd been right. I hadn't come to make peace. I'd come to avoid the pain of having to rebuild something that died with him. Every year since I'd called silence healing, when really it was just the quiet sound of giving up. I picked up a small pine cone from beside the grave, brown, perfect, untouched by snow. He used to collect them when he was little, lining them on the windowsill like trophies. He once told me they were sleeping trees, and I laughed because I didn't understand what he meant. Now, standing in that field of white, I finally did. Some things don't die. They just wait for warmth to wake them. The wind shifted, carrying faint bells from the church down the road. I looked back toward the path where footprints marked where I'd come from. There was only one set. I realized how long I'd been walking alone. "You used to talk to him," I could almost hear her say. "I still do. Not with words." "No," I murmured. Words stopped meaning anything after he left. The candle beside the stone flickered one last time before the flame gave out completely. The smoke curled up thin and fragile, disappearing into the pale morning air. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection faintly in the marble, a face I almost didn't recognize. The lines deeper, the eyes quieter. That's when it hit me. Peace hadn't made me better. It had made me a stranger. The drive back felt longer. The car heater hummed softly, and for once I didn't try to fill the silence. I let it breathe heavy and honest. The road unwound before me, like an unbroken sentence, one I'd never finished writing. And in that slow, endless quiet, I finally said it aloud. Not to her, not to him, but to the empty seat beside me. I became someone peace could live with, but love couldn't. The words hung in the air like frost, sharp and fleeting. Outside, the first light of afternoon slipped through the clouds, pale, almost golden. And for the briefest moment, it felt like forgiveness, though I knew it wasn't. The snow hadn't stopped. It fell slow and steady, the kind of snow that made time forget how to move. By evening, the house was wrapped in quiet again, a kind of peace that didn't comfort, only contained. She moved through the kitchen like someone following a script she'd memorized years ago. Her steps soft, her rhythm unbroken. There were no carols playing this year, no candles on the window, just the faint sound of plates touching the table one by one, like punctuation in a sentence neither of us had finished. I watched Yar from the doorway. The table was already set for 3. "You still do this?" I'd asked once. "Traditions don't die just because people do." She placed the last plate down, adjusted the silverware, then paused. Her hand hovered over the chair, the same one that hadn't been touched since that night. The candle beside it flickered, though there was no wind. I wanted to step in to stop her, to say something human. "You don't have to keep feeding ghosts." But the words stayed behind my teeth, too afraid to break whatever fragile thing was still holding us together. The clock ticked past 8. The room smelled of roasted pine and cold wine. We sat in silence again, 2 survivors of the same memory. She poured the wine, 2 glasses only. But when she turned, the sabah by the empty chair flared its flame, stretching high for a moment before calming again. She froze, so did I. "Did you see that it's just the draft?" I whispered, though I knew all the windows were shut. We ate slowly, if eating could be called that. Mostly, it was just moving food from plate to plate, pretending the ritual meant something. Halfway through, the chair made a sound, a small scrape, like someone had shifted their weight. The silver fork in her hand trembled, clinking against the porcelain. Her eyes lifted, not to me, but to the space beside us. "You're home," she said softly. "Don't," I muttered, but she wasn't talking to me. The air changed. The light bent. For a heartbeat, the room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, like a memory had decided to live again, just for a moment. The chair stood slightly angled, now facing her. She reached forward, fingers trembling just above the table. "I kept it warm," she whispered. I could hear it. Faint, maybe. Only imagined a laugh so small it barely reached the air. Not a sound from this world, but something lighter, older. The candle wavered. I stood up too fast, the chair behind me scraping the floor. "Stop it," I said, too sharp, too scared. She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed on the empty seat. "You always come when it's quiet," she said. "He's not here," I whispered. "Then why does it feel like he is?" The room fell still again, but not silent. The air seemed to hum like a faint note just below hearing. The candle flickered once more, and this time the glass beside the empty plate tipped slightly, just enough to spill a drop of wine. It ran across the tablecloth like a red thread curling toward her hand. She smiled through the shimmer of tears. Every Christmas, she murmured, he finds his way home. I wanted to tell her it wasn't real, that it was just memory looping, refusing to fade. But I didn't, because deep down, I wasn't sure either. Maybe grief doesn't haunt us. Maybe it just stays hungry, waiting to be fed once a year. The night deepened. The snow outside glowed under the lamplight. The house smelled of smoke and old pine. I sat down again, finally, picking up my fork, though I couldn't taste anything. "If ghosts eat," I said quietly, "they eat what we leave behind. Then let them," she answered, her eyes never leaving the empty chair. "It's all we have left to give." The clock chimed once, then again. 3 echoes, 1 for each place at the table. And for the first time in years, I didn't fight the silence. I let it sit beside us like something that had been waiting to be welcomed back all along. The morning after felt wrong, too quiet, too still. The kind of silence that doesn't wait for sound because it already remembers it. The chair was still turned slightly toward the table, just the way she'd left it. The wine stain had dried into a soft scar across the cloth, dark and tender like a bruise that refused to fade. The bed was untouched. Her coat was gone. No note, no sound. Only the scent of her perfume still hanging in the doorway, faint and fading, like the end of a song that never learned how to finish. I walked through the house slowly, careful not to disturb the quiet. The floors creaked, like they were speaking another language, one made of years and weight. The cup she'd used the night before was still on the counter, her lipstick a soft echo on the rim. I didn't wash it. Some things aren't meant to be cleaned away. The radio in the corner had switched on by itself, static and faint melody, a song too old for anyone to remember. The kind of tune that knows its own sadness. I smiled faintly. "You should have stayed asleep," I whispered. For a long time I stood in the middle of the kitchen, just listening. The silence wasn't empty. It had texture, memory, breath. It moved through the room like a tide carrying fragments of voices I once knew. "You left the window open again, did I?" "You always do." The whisper drifted through like wind, soft, familiar, not loud enough to frighten, just real enough to stay. I turned toward the sound, but the doorway was empty. The air shimmered faintly, the way heat does when it rises from asphalt in summer. Except this was cold. From the kitchen came a faint clink. A plate settling, a fork shifting. I could almost hear her voice saying I'd forgotten my coffee, though maybe that was just the house remembering out loud. I touched the table. It was warm. The smell of wax lingered. The air felt heavier near the chair, as if something unseen had sat down again. I walked to the window. The snow was melting at the edges, thin veins of water carving through white. The world was still not peaceful, not and just holding its breath. I caught my reflection in the glass and almost didn't recognize it. Not because I'd changed, but because it looked like someone else was standing behind me, not quite visible, but present enough to believe. It's not her you miss, I told myself quietly. It's the silence. It remembers you better than she does. The thought settled deep, calm, and merciless. Maybe that's all memory is, the silence that stays when love forgets to return. I walked back to the table and sat down again facing the empty chair. It felt different. Now less like an invitation, more like a reflection. The air hummed softly, as if waiting for something to be said. I don't know how to live with peace anymore, I whispered. The silence didn't answer, but something inside me did. It told me to stop calling it peace. My chest loosened a little, not in relief, but in recognition. The house seemed to exhale with me, the walls settling, like they'd been holding something in too long. The candle from last night was still on the table. I lit it again. The flame wavered, hesitant, at first then steady. Its light touched the glass, the plates, the stains, small fragments of a story, still refusing to end. Outside, the snow began again, soft and soundless. Inside the house, remembered everything I tried to forget, and as I sat there in the quiet, it occurred to me maybe this was all grief ever wanted. Not to be loud, not to be healed, just to be heard once more. The day broke pale, all color drained from the world. The kind of morning that looked like it had been painted in silence. The snow had stopped, but the air still carried that weight. The one that comes after a storm, when everything pretends to be calm, but nothing really is. I spent most of the day walking through the house like a stranger in a museum of my own life. Every object seemed to know more about me than I did the chair, the candle, the glass with its small crack near the rim. They were all witnesses, now patient, quiet, refusing to forget. On the dresser by the hallway, I found a frame turned face down. I didn't remember leaving it that way. When I lifted it, the dust left a perfect outline where it had rested. I brushed it off carefully, like I was afraid of waking something. It was our old photograph taken on a winter years ago. The kind where snow looked almost gold under the streetlights. She was smiling. I wasn't. I'd forgotten that about us, how one of us was always trying to be the warmth while the other learned how to stay cold. But something had changed. The picture was creased right through the middle, folded carefully, deliberately. The fold cut across my face, clean as a wound. Half of me gone, her side untouched. For a while I couldn't move. The stillness felt heavier than grief. She stopped waiting, I heard myself say. Not out loud, just a thought that had been sitting in my chest, waiting for the right silence to come out. I set the photo down, smoothing the crease with my thumb, as if I could erase it by remembering. But the paper had learned the shape of forgetting it wouldn't unfold. The room was filled with light, the soft kind that made everything look honest. It touched the photo, the walls, the empty chair behind me. For a moment, I thought I saw her there. Not the woman who'd left, but the version who used to look at me like I was worth waiting for. Maybe she didn't stop waiting, I whispered. Maybe I just stopped coming back. The air didn't answer, but something in the way it held still told me it had heard. That's the thing about silence. It always listens, even when it doesn't forgive. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink. The cup in my hand looked fragile, almost transparent. I remembered her saying once, "We're all just things that hold what's given until we can't anymore." Maybe that was what love was, not a promise, but a vessel. Something that only worked as long as both hands were still holding on. I went back to the photo, now lying face up on the table. The light had shifted, landing squarely across her half of the picture. Mine stayed in shadow. I didn't move it. There was something right about it, something honest. She stopped waiting, I said again, this time without sadness. But that's how she forgave me. The words hung in the room like breath in cold air, visible, fleeting, human. I folded the photo the same way she had and placed it back where I'd found it. Then I sat down facing the window. The snow had melted into patches of water that mirrored the sky, soft gray, forgiving nothing but promising nothing either. I realized something. Then we talk about forgiveness like it's something we give to others. But sometimes it's what they take back from us when they decide to stop waiting. The clock ticked once, faint and final. The house sighed a sound I'd learned to love, because it reminded me something was still alive. And for the first time in years, I didn't wait for the silence to speak. I let it keep what it remembered. I let it be hers. It took me 2 days to open the drawer she'd left unlocked. The key sat on the counter, placed carefully beside her cup, like an invitation I'd been avoiding. The house had stopped trying to speak by then. Even the silence had grown tired of waiting. Inside the drawer was her handwriting. Pages, dozens of them stacked neatly in a small notebook bound with a red ribbon. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and candle smoke. Her scent lingered between the lines, like she'd been waiting for someone to finish what she'd started. The first line said that if I was reading this, she'd finally stopped setting the table. My hands froze. The air in the room changed thinner, sharper, like truth cutting through dust. She wrote that she used to think forgiveness was about remembering, but she had learned it was about letting memory go where it hurts least. I read slower, afraid of getting to the end. Her sentences felt alive, each one. breathing against the quiet. She said the chair wasn't for him, not even for me, but for the man who had died quietly inside me, the one who once believed love could outlast pride. I stopped there. The words blurred not from tears, but from recognition, the kind that comes when you finally see your own ghost staring back. I'd spent years burying pieces of myself and calling it healing. Every apology I never said. Every silence I named peace. Every night I let her fall asleep, believing it was her fault we had stopped being a story. The snow outside pressed against the window, whispering. The world felt small again, the way it does when you're finally honest. I turned another page. She missed the way I used to talk to her, not with words, but with presence. She wrote that silence had never been our problem. Distance had. Presence. That word hit harder than any accusation, because she was right. There had been a time when just sitting beside her was enough. Before words got heavy, before peace became distance, before forgiveness became furniture. I closed the notebook for a moment, my fingers tracing the grain of the cover. The room around me blurred all gold and gray and soft edges. Somewhere her in the walls, her voice returned, as memory, small, tired, kind. She once told me I didn't have to say I was sorry, because she already knew. Back then I thought it was mercy. Now I know it was exhaustion. I opened to the final page. There wasn't much written. Just a single line. If you ever come back, sit where you used to. I've kept the chair warm. That broke something quiet inside me. Not loudly, not violently, but with the soft certainty of truth, finally landing where it belongs. I looked at the chair across the table. The candle beside it had melted low, the wick barely holding on. I pulled it closer, lit it again, and sat down in front of it. For the first time in years, I said the words she had stopped waiting to hear. I'm sorry. The air didn't move. No sound followed. But something in the room shifted like gravity had changed. I closed the notebook gently and set it on the table beside the untouched glass of wine. My reflection in the window looked smaller, older, maybe truer. The man she wrote to wasn't here anymore. He was the one I buried with every apology I never said. And somehow admitting that didn't feel like loss. It felt like permission. The wind howled once outside, then softened. The candle flame steadied. I sat there long after it went out, my hands still warm from its light. Morning came again, slow and uncertain, as if the light itself wasn't sure it should return. The candle on the table had burned to its base. Only a curl of wax remained clinging to the wood, like a final gesture. The chair across from me was still warm. Not from her, not from memory, from the quiet that had learned to stay. I sat there a long time, tracing the grain of the table with my thumb, the same way I used to trace the lines on her palm. The house no longer felt haunted, just lived in by something that had stopped demanding to be heard. I looked around. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The cup by the window, the folded napkin, the photo frame with my half hidden. Each object seemed to ask the same question. Now what? There was no answer, only stillness. I had spent so many years running from rooms like this, afraid of what silence might say if I stayed too long. But now, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for a sound. I was waiting for the silence to stop hurting. It didn't, but it began to soften. The wind rose against the window, carrying faint bells from somewhere far away. Christmas again, though it no longer mattered what day it was. Time had become a circle in this house, one that always began and ended at this table. I reached for the notebook again, not to read, but to hold. Its weight felt human. I could almost imagine her hand still pressing against it, the ink warm, the pages breathing. I whispered into the air, though I wasn't sure who I was speaking to. You don't have to forgive me. The words felt lighter once they left. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something she owed me. Maybe it was what she had already taken with her, the clean kind of forgiveness that comes when someone finally leaves. I looked at the chair across from me. The candle's shadow split my reflection down the middle, half light, half dark. The same divide I'd carried inside for years. I stood up and moved to her side of the table. The wood creaked softly as I sat down. The air there felt different, warmer somehow, like it remembered her breathing. I rested my hands on the table, palms open. No words, no prayers, just presence. And in that stillness, something inside me shifted, not dramatically, but quietly, the way snow gives underfoot, without sound. The man she wrote to was gone, but the man who stayed, he was still learning to listen. I realized then that forgiveness isn't a gift you receive. It's a space you choose to stay in long enough for the past to stop echoing. Outside, the first real sunlight of winter broke through the clouds, thin and gold. It touched the table, the notebook, the chair I'd just left behind. I didn't move. I let the light find me. It fell across my hands, the same hands that had once held too much silence. And for a brief moment, they didn't shake. The wind outside carried a sound, not bells this time, but a single steady note, like the world remembering to breathe. And in that small breath of morning, I understood she hadn't kept the chair warm for me to return. She'd kept it warm, so I'd remember how to stay. When the snow began to melt, the world sounded different. You could hear the earth waking, a soft dripping from the eaves, the slow release of ice surrendering to gravity. The air was still cold, but no longer sharp. It carried a gentleness, a hint of something living underneath the white. For the first time in months, I opened the back door and let the morning in. The smell of thawed pine, wet soil, and faint smoke from a neighbor's chimney drifted through. It was the kind of morning that didn't announce change. It just arrived, quiet, unnoticed, and already halfway done. The chair was still at the table, waiting in its same corner. The candle beside it had long burned out, its wax hardened into a twisted sculpture. The notebook lay closed beside it, tied again with the same red ribbon. I had stopped reading it days ago. There were no more words left to find, only space. I stood there for a while, looking at the chair. It wasn't a symbol anymore. It wasn't a memory either. It was just a thing that had done its job, holding what neither of us could carry. I reached down, gripped its back, and lifted it carefully. It was lighter than I remembered, though maybe I had finally stopped confusing weight with meaning. Outside, the snow had thinned into patches of silver. I placed the chair on the porch, right where the sunlight fell across the wooden boards. The seat caught on the light instantly. A warm, soft gold. For a second, it looked alive. I sat in the doorway, watching the chair glow under the morning sun. It wasn't grief that I felt, not anymore. It was something else, something calmer, older, like the sound of a prayer that doesn't ask for anything. For years, I'd thought healing meant moving on, leaving behind. Now I knew it meant staying long enough for something to change on its own. I closed my eyes. The wind brushed against my face, carrying the scent of melted snow. Somewhere down the road, children were laughing. A dog barked once, then again, its echo carried by the open air. Life was still happening. It always had been. I just hadn't been here to see it. In the silence that followed, I thought of her, not the way she left, not the way she cried that last Christmas, but the way she once looked at the sky as if forgiveness was hidden somewhere behind the clouds. She had always believed in spring, even when I didn't. She used to say that snow was just the world's way of starting over. Back then, I had laughed. Now, sitting here with the chair beside me, I realized she was right. Every flake that fell was meant to disappear, to melt, to nourish, to become something else. Maybe love was like that too. I leaned forward, brushing a thin layer of frost from the chair's armrest. My fingers left small streaks of warmth on the wood. "You did your part," I whispered. "You waited." It wasn't for her anymore. It was for me, the version of myself that had needed something to hold on to long enough to let go. I stood up and stepped into the yard. The snow crunched underfoot, wet and soft. The sun caught the puddles, turning them into mirrors. My reflection was everywhere, broken, scattered, but still mine. From the porch, the chair watched quietly. Its shadow stretched long across the boards, reaching almost to where I stood. For a moment, it looked like it was trying to follow me. That's when I realized something simple. She never wanted me to keep waiting. The chair wasn't meant to be an altar. It was a lesson. To remember, but not to remain. I walked to the edge of the yard where the snow met the grass. The earth was damp, alive again. Birds darted between branches, cautious but curious. A single drop of water slid down from the roof, landing right beside my shoe. I thought about how easily things end and how quietly they begin again. The sound of melting filled the air like 1,000 clocks ticking out of sync. It didn't make sense. It didn't have to. It was beautiful anyway. I turned back to the porch. The chair sat there still in sunlight, still waiting. But it no longer looked lonely. It looked done. I went inside one last time, gathered the candle stub and the notebook, and brought them out with me. I set them on the seat, the flames remnant, beside the words that once held us together. The wind turned the pages slightly, stopping on a blank one near the back. For a second, I thought about writing something, a goodbye, a name, a reason. But the page looked complete without it. Silence had already filled the space perfectly. So instead I closed it and tied the ribbon once more. The sun climbed higher. The last traces of snow around the porch began to fade. A bird landed on the railing, tilted its head, then flew off again. I sat on the step beside the chair, my hands resting loosely on my knees. I didn't pray. I didn't promise. I just breathed. And in that breath I understood forgiveness isn't what you give or receive. It's what survives after both are gone. The chair stayed where it was facing the light. I didn't move it back inside. It had earned its place there, under the open sky, between what was gone and what still remained. As the morning stretched toward afternoon, I thought of her again. Not with sorrow, this time, but with quiet gratitude. She had been right about many things about snow, about peace, about how love doesn't end. It simply changes rooms. I whispered her name once just to hear how it sounded in the air. It didn't hurt anymore. It sounded almost familiar again, like coming home. The sunlight caught the red ribbon on the notebook, making it shimmer briefly before the wind took it, lifting it off the chair and into the yard, where it danced across the wet grass, twisting, gleaming free. I watched until it disappeared behind the trees. Then I looked back at the chair. It stood quietly in the light, empty, golden, eternal. Not a monument, not a memory, just a witness to everything that needed to end and everything that chose to begin again. And for the first time since that Christmas night, I smiled. Not because I was healed, but because I had finally learned how to stay and how to let go.